welcome to a very relevant and interesting topic of discussion today. I am 𝗗𝗶𝘀𝗃𝗃. This topic is affecting a big chunk of our population because there's a salt alert that is being sounded. As you would be surprised to know that on an average, every Indian is consuming more salt than required. The WHO says 5 grams of salt per day. But do you know that the average consumption is around 8 grams per day? And this is causing to leading incidences of hypertension and heart issues. Today, I have a very esteemed panel of doctors to discuss this very crucial topic. Salt alert, Indians consuming 3% more than recommended. Tips to reduce the intake. I would like to welcome our honorable doctors. I have with me Dr. Jabir Abdullakutty, Senior Consultant Cardiologist, Director of Clinical Research, Lizzie Heart Institute, Cochin. I also have with me Professor Dr. Nagamalesh UM, Lead Consultant Cardiology, Interventional Cardiologist, Director Heart Failure, Transplant and MCS Program, Esther CMI Hospital, Bengaluru. And I also have on the panel Dr. S. Manoj, Senior Consultant and Interventional Cardiologist, Kaveri Hospital, Chennai. A very warm welcome to you, doctors, on the show.
Morning. Thank you.
I would like to begin with Dr. Abdullakutty. How much sodium one should consume each day, doctor, to stay healthy?
Look, sodium is an important molecule for our body functions, normal physiological functions. But for that thing, we require only around 500 milligrams, that is 0.5 gram of salt a day. But if you look at the average salt consumption across the world, it's close to 10 grams a day. And Indian data, ICMR research, they showed that it's around 8 grams per day. So that means we are taking almost 10 times of the amount which is required for normal physiological functions of the body. And the WHO cutoff or WHO recommendation is less than 5 grams of salt. That means 2 grams of sodium a day. But it is needed only in a small amount. We are right now consuming more of the salt. We have to cut down it to less than 5 grams a day.
Absolutely. So I would like to come to Dr. Nagamalesh. Like it is being said, salt is poison if taken in excess. So that means we are taking a lot of hidden salt unconsciously. And why should one be concerned about this hidden salt?
See, this hidden salt is the one which you would not expect it in the food. You think that the salt is not there, but you'll be consuming a lot of salt when you eat this. Especially you see this in packed food. Some of the chips, snacks, and dessert. You're surprised to have very, very high amount of salt that, you know, if you eat one packet of this snacks, probably you'll be eating 3 days of your regular food, what you consume salt. And even the bowl of cereals sometimes contain more salt than your daily whole day intake. So we have to be careful about hidden salt. And what is required is when you're consuming any food, especially packed food, please read the label and see what is the sodium content, and then only you consume. So high sodium content, without your knowledge, it can go, you think that salt is not there, but you're consuming very high amount of salt.
Right. Dr. Manoj, how can one cut down on the levels of sodium in packaged foods?
I think we have understood that salt is a very important ingredient in the human diet. At the same time, excess quantity of salt causes consequences of various diseases and disorders like high blood pressure, heart failure, heart attack, and also affects the overall general health. So it's quite vital to look at what you consume in your day-to-day practice. Look at the salt content in your diet. If you're buying tinned or packaged foods, look at the nutritional facts check and try to look at the food contents with less added salt or reduced salt or sodium. And probably you can have a guide of less than 150 milligram per each serving as a fundamental check to see whether there is an excess quantity in each serving. It's also good to and encouraged to prepare your own food at home. And food cooked at home is always the salt added to the food is under your check. And if you have a cook at home, as much as you say and check the nutritional label, you could guide the cook to have a less salt added every time in each of the dishes that is prepared. If you're eating outside in a hotel, just as much as you give the menu of your choices, you can also direct the chef to have reduced salt in your portion that is being cooked for you. So there are various measures by which you can keep a check on the salt and make it very healthy as well as delicious to eat and have a control on what you take in your diet.
I think some very valuable tips you've given here. Next, Dr. Jabir, what are some high sodium common foods that one should ideally avoid?
If you look at the history of the salt usage, the life originated in a salt-rich environment. Then as per the evolution, we moved into the land, and salt was not available in the land in any other natural things. Then we invented salt, and it was very expensive thing. And in fact, the word salary came from salt, because salt was exchanged or salt was given as an inam. But then salt was basically used for preserving things. So for fish, for meat, salt was used for a large quantity of salt was used for preserving these things. So all the preserved materials, preserved food have salt and excess of salt. As Dr. Manoj was telling, we should use fresh food rather than preserved thing. Then for Indians, it is specifically, we are so fond of our pickles, high salt content, 𝗶𝗶𝗀𝗃, high salt content. Then certain areas of the country where they use dry fish, we have dry fish because the fish, when they have excess catch of the fish, they put salt for preserving it. A lot of things we preserve, dry it, put large quantities of salt and preserve it. So it is basically 𝗶𝗶𝗃s, pickled, preserved food, sauces, bakery items. All the baked things have excess of sodium. It may not be salt, but there will be excess of sodium. In fact, we are worried about the sodium in the salt, not the chloride in the salt. So that sodium is excess in all the baked materials. So basically it is preserved foods, pickles, 𝗶𝗶𝗃s, and all the baked food materials, and preserved things, and sauces also contain large excess amount of salt.
Right. And we can easily cut down on these if we are conscious about our salt intake. Professor Nagamalesh, what cultural habits do you think contribute to high salt intake in a country like India?
I think Jabir was just telling me about the same thing, and the pickle and 𝗶𝗶𝗃 and this meat preservation, all this has got very high amount of sodium basically, and also the street food basically. So street food and restaurant food contain very high amount of salt, and also some traditionally cooking method also contain very high amount of salt. So uh, our culturally different from each region. So, but we end up consuming the same amount of sodium throughout India in a different format.
Dr. Manoj, there are a lot of people who can't cook at home, or they can't do so for some reason. For people who are regularly eating out, how can they try to lower their sodium intake? Is there a way?
Well, certainly, yes. And eating out has certainly been a very social habit. And being a very socialized human being, there is always a community gathering and various functions and various meetings where one has to participate. And the food has become an essential component, especially when eating out. So you could certainly make your preferences known as much as you choose your dishes, as I said previously. Everybody have their preferences and their meal menu, and you could guide the chef also about your preferences on the salt as well as the oil. You could say, I would prefer to have a less oil. Most of the time, these food prepared, you would see a layer of oil floating on the dish that is prepared and served on your table. On the same way, you could always guide the chef to make it prepared with a less salt. You could always give your preferences for a steamed food, and also replace some of the dishes with your delicacies with salt supplemented with spices and herbs, which would also add to much flavor and thereby minimize the salt in the cooked food. The sauces and dressings also, as well as these fryams and the pickles and 𝗶𝗶𝗃s, which are also served apart from the menu can always be avoided, or you could always have your preferences of not eating or not preferring to have them in your meal.
Right. Dr. Jabir, we've talked about pickles, poppers, and chips. Are there any healthy snack options with little or no sodium content?
I must tell, if you want to avoid salt or restrict the salt intake, for a patient who has cardiovascular illness, I think it is better to avoid snacking. That's the best way. No snacks. Because what snacks are we eating? We eat chips, we eat bakery items, we eat French fries, we eat the mixtures. All these bakery things, they have a large amount of salt in it. So other snacks, and then biscuits, cookies, all have high sodium content. So if you want to say goodbye to these snacks, what else can we have without salt? You can have cut fruits. I don't know how many will take it as a snack, but that's the best thing. Cut fruits, salad, cut vegetables. And another good snack is you can have nuts. Nuts is a treasure house of a lot of micronutrients, though they have fat. That fat is a medium chain fatty acid, which is not dangerous for us. So nuts without salt, but problem is large number of nut preparations, they are all mixed with salt and huge amount of salt. But if you use a walnut, almond, a fresh almond without salt, for that matter, cashew nut, peanuts, we have wide variety of nuts, we have wide variety of vegetables, we have wide variety of fruits. You can use it as a snack, but the problem is you should take away the table salt. Every hotel, every restaurant, they'll keep the table salt, and even people start putting salt and sprinkle the salt on the fruits even. So that table salt culture should be changed. You should not keep the salt on the table. And every food item, snacks should have a label on it. For example, Sri Lanka, they have put a label, high salt content, low salt content, medium salt content. And this is the only way to do it.
I think that's a very relevant suggestion. If we were to talk about salt substitutes, would you recommend anything, Professor Nagamalesh, best salt substitutes that one can use in cooking?
So best thing is to, just like what Dr. Jabir said, to avoid snack or reduce salt. Just like that, first you reduce your salt. Okay, so if you start eating less salt, in 1 month or 2 months, you cannot eat more salt. Okay, this is the thing. Your tongue get used to that. Actually, if you start eating high salt, you feel like eating more and more. First, you start eating less salt. That's the first step in reducing the salt intake. Then you can replace or you can substitute with the lemon, oregano, like some basil, all these herbs, and also spices. All this can be replaced. This you cannot completely replace. You have to reduce the salt and add this. If you add a little more lemon and less salt, that will work. Then rather than eating very high salt.
Does diluting drinks with salt work? For example, lassis, charged that are pre-mixed with salt. If one were to use them, can one dilute it so that the salt intake becomes lesser, or it remains the same?
How is it going to help? If you add 5 grams of salt to 200 ml or 500 ml, you're going to consume that actually. So that will not make any difference. So basically, you have to eat less salt. That's the first step. Actually, you get used to it. Once you start eating less salt, then you don't feel like eating more salt. You start feeling salty if you eat even regular salt.
So the best is to start reducing your salt on a day-by-day basis, and you'll become used to it. Yes. I think the suggestion here. Dr. Manoj, since a lot of people in India also do cooking at home, does cooking from scratch, making everything at home, whatever we eat, or most of it, does that help reduce our salt intake, in your opinion?
Richa, I think you hit the nail. One of the best ways of regulating the salt content in your diet is by cooking at home, because you have all the controls and you could guide the person who is cooking, be it your spouse or yourself or the cook at home. You could guide them with the fresh preparations and the fresh items that are used at home, and control the salt content in the diet. Salt is an adaptive response. If you start using salt much lower in your early life time, you would get adapted to that kind of food, and it's just similar to avoiding white sugar and carbohydrates in the early part of your life. And then if you start eating sweets, so you will feel that it is too sweety. Similarly, as anything which is prepared with less salt, you would feel equally palatable. It's an adaptive response on the taste. You could substitute the salt with herbs and spices, and also add certain lemon as well as substitutes, which could add greater flavor and make it more palatable. You could certainly lower your salt intake distinctly by avoiding the preserved food and the tinned food, and also the foods or items which are consumed which are preserved in the brines. So the brines have a very, very high salt content. And obviously, even at home, the table salt, as Dr. Jabir said, should be avoided. No salt should be kept on the table. And sprinkling of instead of sprinkling salt on the salads, you could always use a lemon and also various garlic sauces and other things. Obviously, many salt items you should be aware of in your day-to-day consumption. And the objective is to restrict the overall salt intake to less than 5 grams or even lesser than that, as being healthily recommended.
Right. Dr. Jabir, there is a health fad these days that rock salt, which we also call Sendha Namak, or the Himalayan pink salt. A lot of people are thinking that that is healthier than the regular white salt. What is your take on that?
Look, as I previously said, it's the sodium that is important. So whichever salt that contains sodium has to be restricted. So it is rather the total amount of salt that is important than which salt you are taking. But there is a recommendation that if you change over for the use of salt, if you change over from the sodium chloride to a potassium containing salt, that may be preferable because the sodium content comes down. But that may not be as palatable as the sodium chloride. Because sodium chloride is, as everybody suggests, it is acquired taste. Your taste buds are adjusted to tune to it. Now, what people are doing across the world is they change the dietary habit of the children from the beginning of the life onwards. They don't give salt, they don't give sugar. And then these children, and when they grow up, they cannot tolerate salt or sugar because it's an acquired culture. So it is not the type of salt that is important, it is the amount of salt that is important. Of course, if you change over to potassium salts rather than sodium salts, that may help help a little bit more.
So that means the pink salt, Himalayan salt, rock salt, which have potassium content, are slightly better.
There are certain salts which is a potassium salt rather than a sodium salt. It is rather than changing to the other salt. Why don't you control the salt or reduce the salt? That's the question. That's the crux of the matter.
Okay. Dr. Nagamalesh, how can parents reduce salt in their children's diets?
So, and just now we are discussing, so these kids are very, very sensitive to salt. So it should be controlled from early life. If you start giving less salt from the childhood, usually they don't tolerate high salt diet in the later of their life. So you cannot change them when they are 20, 25, should be changed very early. So when they cook food, cook at home and add less salt and make them feel, natural taste of the food than adding extra salt to make it tasty. So some of the junk food like instant noodles, chips, all this contain very, very high dose of salt that should be avoided. Once in a while is fine, but regularly eating this definitely can increase the salt load. So changing their dietary pattern from the early can have a significant difference in the later of their life.
Okay. Salt is a part of Indian culture in terms of how we cook, how we preserve foods, how we make snacks with it. Dr. Manoj, how can one convince one's family to reduce the salt intake? Because it's difficult to make food separately for yourself and the family differently. If the family is addicted to higher salt intake, how does one help?
Yeah, as rightly said, family is a fundamental role in all aspects of the human living. And it comes in the diet also. So we are born in the family, we grow up in the family, and what we eat in the early stages of our growth and development matters significantly, and therefore we can educate our own family members, and that's where the societal changes happen from each and every family to transform their food habits and also the cultural habits. There are certain cultural practices where they add salt while cooking the rice itself, and these are some of the important things that need to be transformed. And education and also how you prepare the food at home is a very, very really important aspect of controlling the dietary content of the salt. With various practices, we can take salt in the right amount and not in excess and not too little. So there are many ways that we could do that. You have to also learn cooking culture and cooking habits. It's important aspect of our human living that all of us know how to cook the basic food items and taste the food before we start adding more and more salt to the dishes. So it's a very important aspect. While you prepare at each stages, you taste the food a little bit and see whether the salt is in adequate amount. Risk of excessive salt intake has to be well educated among all the family members, and this is particularly often obvious only when one of the family members suffers a major health ailments. Then everybody becomes very sensitive to the salt. So I think it is a very good cultural habit to start very early in the life, and swapping your processed food for more healthier choices, using more of spicy and various seasoning agents can help you have a very delicious food. Now, the WHO has come out with a very important statement of shaking the salt. So SHAKE, shake the salt, which will go a long way for reducing the global salt intake. The S stands for surveillance, and the H stands for harness the industry in preparing more food items with less and less sodium content, and adopt standards of quality check on the nutritional content of the sodium in all the prepared food. And K stands for the knowledge sharing with every members in the society and also family, how the sodium is important, as well as in higher quantity it is a poison, as Dr. Jabir initially said. So moderation is the very important as much as any other nutrient intake in the food. And finally, the E stands for education and environmental education, how the salt can affect the environment and also your health environment is very, very important aspect. So if you really look into all these aspects, we can certainly shake the salt and bring it down significantly and lead a very healthy lifestyle at home as well as in the society.
Thank you so much, doctors, for a wonderful discussion. I have had a lot of takeaways, and I'm sure our audience would have definitely gained a lot of knowledge about cutting their salt intake, the importance of it, the importance of taking low sodium, how to reduce salt in our daily cooking, our daily usage. Lots and lots of suggestions, very valuable and very usable, I would say. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing this vital knowledge with us and all our viewers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richa.